Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all for joining us today. For those of you who may not know me, I am Karen Roberson. I have been with Oasis for over 30 years now, and I've been doing ERP consulting for over 40 years now. I've been at it for a little while. And today I am going to help you with Sage 100's closing order of the modules. So along with that, I've got some extra information that I'll be sharing with you. And we should have time at the end to answer any questions. There is at the bottom of your Zoom screen, there's a Q&A button. So if you have any questions during the webinar, feel free to type those in as we go. Your microphones are muted. So with that, what I'm doing is, many times, I've got some slides here that we're going to go through because I know a lot of people, they can remember things easier, being a visual learner. I know that's true for me, and I found it to be true for a lot of people. So rather than me just talking, I thought it would be helpful to see some of the words up here. So I like to start this off with the importance of backups. And the reason for that is we have had clients with situations where they did some period end processing and they did not first check to make sure that their history settings were appropriate for their needs. So they lost history. And in some situations, they knew right away and they were able to restore. In other situations, they didn't realize it until too far down the line. So they had lost all of that history. So one of the things that we'll be looking at is some of the settings in your system on how you can make sure that you've got things set the way that you want them to be. And we will get into Sage 100 in just a bit. So when you get to the point that you're ready to perform period end processing, the best practice is to have everyone out of the system. You've got, like if you've got inventory opens accounts receivable, customer files, because you've got customer pricing options. It opens your accounts payable vendor information because you can assign vendors and you have vendor pricing. So it just best practice. You may find that there are certain modules that you can go ahead and close while people are out. But another reason why it's good to just get everybody out is good chance to get that backup and make sure that you've got everything ready to go in case you need it. And so something that I like to let people know, a primary reason to run your period end processing is keep people from posting to a period that you have closed. So if you've run all your reports and you're reconciled and everything is good, then a good way to prevent somebody from either accidentally or purposely posting to a prior period is to go ahead and run that period end processing for all of the modules. And one of the reasons that we're here today is, there's a logic to how you close your modules. So some of the modules, I already mentioned how an inventory, uses accounts receivable and accounts payable files. As far as closing them, I've got an example here because you've got interaction between the different modules. So for example, if you closed inventory, but you still had purchase order open and somebody discovers a receipt that did not get entered. So we're in November now, so we can use October and November as some examples. So if you've got inventory closed for October and we're here in November and somebody finds a receipt and they say, oh, this was October, we missed it. And the purchase order module will let them post that to October, excuse me, but when it gets to the inventory portion, October's not open. So it's going to post those that information into November. So that's just one example. There are lots of them. Okay, so another question people ask is what happens when we do our period in processing. So the one thing that every module does is it will bump the current period by 1. And then, of course, if you're at the end of your fiscal year, it will move the year up by 1 too. And then it goes through, depending on which module you're in, and it checks the history settings. And then it determines if it's time to remove some of the history or some of the open invoices and open purchase orders. And we will, I'll explain some of that when we go look at some of the options. And then if it works best for your processes, you've got the ability to print some of those reports as a part of that closing process. All right, so now that we've gone through that, I am going to take you into Sage 100. All right, so one of the things that I like to train people is when you're closing your modules, start at the bottom and work your way up. Some of these modules, well, obviously, there are very few of you that will have all of these. So your menu list will look different than mine. And then some of these don't have a period in processing to run. Now, I'm going to show you something. Over here on the View menu, there is an option to sort your module list. I know there are many of you that like to have this in alphabetical order. And when you do that, you lose that kind of rule that I have always tried to teach people to start from the bottom and work your way up. So when it's time to start your period in processing, one of the things you might want to do is come over here and just temporarily, you can unsort that. And then this puts it back in what's considered the native order of modules. So then going up and looking at the different modules, Custom Office, you all have Visual Integrator. None of these here have any period in processing. So bank reconciliation is the first thing that almost all of you, if not all of you, would have. And you'll notice bank reconciliation does not have a period end menu. And I'm going to just give you a heads up. Sage 100's bank reconciliation does not maintain a history. So you need to make sure that as you are processing your bank reconciliations, that you save your reports, hopefully to paperless Office, but at least to a PDF file. And then moving up the module list, production management is next. And you'll see that production management does have a period in processing. And then continuing up, bill of materials does not. We'll bypass that one. And job cost, it does have a period in processing. Return merchandise authorization, it does not. And then when we get to purchase order, it does have a period in processing. And we'll talk a little more in depth about that in short order here. And then up in sales order, it also has a period in processing. And then if you've got inventory requirements planning, or if you're on an older version that has material requirements planning, neither of those have a period in processing. And then we have inventory management. It does have a period in processing. And payroll, it also does. Accounts payable does. The customer relationship management does not. That is just, if you've got the Sage CRM, that's just a link between the two. And then accounts receivable has a period in processing, and general ledger has a period in processing. And excuse me, with that, I am going to come down. I've got some things set up in my favorites menu so that I can go through some of these screens rather quickly. So I want to show you some of the things that are in these options. So if I go into the general ledger options, you'll see down here near the right corner, the years to retain general ledger history. You can set it up to 99 years. So, you know, I have had clients who have had that set down to what is actually the minimum of 2 years, and that would only retain your current year and the prior year of history. So there are people who have lost that, so I highly recommend everybody double check what you've got that set at. And that one's pretty simple and straightforward. The accounts payable options, we've got some additional settings on this one, and I don't know why that minimized. Okay, so in accounts payable, and then also in accounts receivable, we have the months to retain paid invoices. You see, I've got mine set at 9,999 months. And if you happen to be on an older version of Sage 100, yours might say the number of days to retain your paid invoices. And what this is referring to is, you know, when you're in vendor maintenance or customer maintenance, and you go to your tab 6 that has your invoices listed, that is not your entire invoice history. That is just the number, or just the invoices rather, that have either an open balance, they'll stay out there as long as there's an open balance, or that have not gone to a zero balance within this number of months or days. So you still have a totally separate invoice history that is different than that. And then if we go to tab 5, we have over here, in the case of accounts payable, we've got the years to retain your vendor history, and then you've also got your 1099 payment history. So that's how many years that information will be kept. And what all these are referring to is there are, you know, there are inquiry screens, there are history reports, and all of that information will stay in your system as long as you've told it to stay. And like popping back over here to tab 2 with the months retained paid invoices, you know how you can take your accounts payable and accounts receivable trial balance reports and your aged invoice reports, and you can run them for a period back in time. That's only based on how long you've told this field to retain. Okay, so let's go now over to the purchase order options because there's something special there also. It has the days to retain your completed purchase orders. So I've got mine set at 999 days. And what that means is once a purchase order has a completed status, when you go into purchase order entry, you can still see that purchase order. And then when you run period in processing, it goes through and it checks on what this setting is. And if it was completed more than this number of days ago, it will remove it from your open purchase order list. Now, you still have your purchase order history, you know, as long as you've got that turned on. And that is over here on tab 7, you know, to make sure you retain purchase order history. So for many years, you didn't have a separate purchase order history, so that other one was more important. If you've been on Sage 100 for a period of time, you may have that first setting higher because there was no prior purchase order history. So, if you feel like your purchase order entry list is cluttered, you can look at, lowering that down. Right, then the next thing that's got some special things, the common information options. So your inventory, how long you retain your inventory transactions and your history is determined in the common information setup menu. And in there we have your common information options, and this defines how long you're keeping all of your history. So that's not real intuitive, so I like to make sure that I point that out for you. Okay, so I am going to start here in General Ledger, and I want to show you the actual period in processing. So in all of the modules, when you, whoops, like I left something open. Try this again. Okay, so any of the modules where you run your period end processing, you're going to see this option to print period end reports. And if I click that off, it's not going to do any. But if I leave it on, what it's doing is each of the modules has a period end report selection. And Sage 100 comes preloaded with each module having some default reports that are set here. You can obviously modify these, and a lot of times, especially with the general ledger, you're doing your reconciliations, and by the time you get to this point, you often have the reports that you need retained already run and stored. So, you can come, if you don't want to have to remember to check that box off because you don't want to do them, you can come in here, use this little red X over here to delete a row. The other thing you can do is if you have created custom report settings, everything defaults to being the standard report setting. And if you have custom ones, you can come over and choose those as the ones that will print. You can also add reports. So if you've got some custom reports, you can come in and you can choose any of those. Or if there are some reports that are in the system that you that aren't here by default that you like to have every month, you can add those also. And you can, if you're physically printing them, you can set the number of copies, and you can also define it to go to a specific printer. All right, so I'm going to switch over to my modules again, and I want to start with purchase order. So there are some reports that you cannot go back and print at any point in time. And depending on which version of Sage 100 you're running, your only option to run a purchase clearing report is to do it as of right this moment. It is one of the perpetual reports. So if you don't have a version that's got this purchases clearing from history report, then you need to make sure that you run that at the point in time that you are, doing your reconciliation. So be aware of that. And I mentioned earlier that bank reconciliation doesn't have its own period in processing, and it doesn't have a history per se, but make sure that you have copies, hopefully with Paperless Office, of your reconciliation reports. And payroll is another special one. The period end processing for payroll is based on quarters. So you'll only run that 4 times a year at the end of each quarter. And for those of you who have payroll, hopefully you know that you can now run your quarter end reports, and then at the end of the year, you can do your W-2s and any of your other reporting. You can do them after you have closed your quarter or you have closed the year. Again, double check before you do your period end processing. Make sure your payroll history is set to an appropriate period of time to stay. Double checking, make sure I didn't miss anything here. And that's all I was going to cover. Let me go see if I have any questions. I don't see anything. So I'll stay online here for a few more moments. If you, just in case anybody has any questions. And as always, if you think of something later, you can always reach out to me. You can reach out to our help desk, help@oasisky.com. And any of us on the Sage 100 team can help you. And thank you so much for your time today. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week.